It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogside Network, the show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports media business industrial complex and all of its dollars and nonsense. How you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing all right, man. And today I'm once again in our Hogside Nashville office. This is the place we really have to pay quite a bit of rent for to keep this office going. Unfortunately, but it's right in the heart of downtown Nashville and all of that. So that is where I am today. How are you doing?
Good, good. Are you there for a bachelorette party?
Yeah, that's it. It's a bachelorette party. I'm gonna wear a pink cowboy hat and drive around in a bus.
Yeah. I think at any one time the population in Nashville is about 13% bachelorette parties at this point,
I
right?
think it is. And the in all seriousness, my parents' neighbor down here calls them the what does she say? It's the woo girls is what she calls them because they're always riding around going woo.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Now you
it
have
is a
news,
thing.
so right? I mean, are you willing to disclose where you were in the off week? If you're not, that I understand, but it's
No, I
interesting.
was. It wasn't that clandestine. I was in Rwanda, so that was pretty wild. 20, let's just call it 25 hours of travel each way.
To sit in a Marriott conference room.
Yes, but I sent mostly in a Marriott. I got out just a little bit, but it was a lovely country and lovely people.
You sent me a picture of like a soccer conference sign or something.
Oh, that's right. I totally forgot about that. Yeah. So as I was exiting, basically FIFA's annual Congress. I mean, like one of their, like I know people are kind of getting all psyched for the NFL owners meeting. It's basically that level of like governance coming together to make decisions about FIFA was like literally rolling in, as I was waiting in the lobby to take a cab to the airport. And I don't mean just, they had construction crews like building facades for the welcome signs and stuff. It was good, like they were like altering the geography of the hotel to welcome FIFA.
Well, you know how much money gets transferred hands in a FIFA conference? I mean, that's like one of the most corrupt, that probably is the most corrupt sports organization in the world, I would guess. If I
I
had to
think the
take a stab at it.
International Olympic Committee has a word for you, Steve.
Oh, wait, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Because I mean, they literally went to jail over that, and
Yeah, no, it's a close call. But yeah, it was pretty funny. We were even a colleague of mine even earlier in the week. We're having a beer. We're actually having a beer at the famous Hotel Rwanda, which the guy who Don Cheadle plays in the movie was literally just released from prison like
oh, was he really?
like a couple days ago. Anyway, and they were like, "Oh, are you here for work?" And we're like, "Yeah, blah blah blah." And they're like, "Oh, are you with FIFA?" And I had no idea that they were coming in. So obviously, like the hotels and all this. This is even a different hotel, but everyone knew FIFA was coming. I'm like, "What?" They're like, "Yeah, FIFA's having a big meeting." I was like, "I had no idea. No, we're not with FIFA." So I had like an inkling, but then when they started to roll out the red carpet, it was pretty interesting.
Somebody's greased a lot of wheels.
Yeah,
And also, I mean,
totally.
you're going to have a conference in Rwanda. I mean, how does that? I don't know. I mean, that seems like a really off the beaten path place to have a major conference like that.
Yeah, although I think they're really courting it too. I think they're trying to turn themselves into that kind of city in Africa.
Well, what you were telling
Um,
me off the air was that it's very secure. It's not what you would think, especially with that Don Cheadle movie. Now you'd think it'd be a disaster, but it sounds like it really wasn't.
no, not at all. Not even in the remotest of ways. So yeah, it was totally safe and secure. Nice people. You know, when you when you kill 1 million people in 3 months, which is what happened during the genocide,
Got a
and you
lot of
have to,
making up to do.
yeah. So you can really tell that there's been a sort of a nationwide movement to not be that.
And of course, you had a great safari.
No,
Go see the
I
lions.
saw the only animal I saw, which I was actually a little bit excited for, was these hawk-like birds. Well, they are hawks, but they're called kites. And I just watched
Yeah,
a documentary about them, and then they were, and they had them everywhere. But
because you
that
had
was as
no
close as
time,
nature.
and it turns out no money, considering how expensive it was to do a safari.
Yeah, that's right. I would have had to pay $1,500. Well, the safari was cheaper. I think the safari was like $300, so I
See,
got
that
it
would have been
for.
doable. I don't care
Yeah,
what animal it is. I'm not paying $1,500 to see it. I'll look it up on YouTube.
I might have. It was to see the gorillas, and I might have paid it. But I was also in I've spent my fourth day in a Marriott conference room, so I was not necessarily in my right faculties.
See, I have kind of a rule though for entertainment, like any single entertainment event, because that safari is what, a half a day or something, or
Yeah,
whatever. I am not paying more than a few $100s at most. Like I've always said, I don't care if Jimi Hendrix comes back from the dead to do a show in Houston, Texas. I'm not paying more than a couple $100 to see it. That's just I'm just cheap that way, and I don't care what it is. I'm not doing it. So that would
yeah.
apply to the
My
safari.
mentality is generally more longshoremen on shore leave. So
Yeah, not me, because like I can go to see a gorilla in the zoo for like $20 if I really have to.
that
So
did cross my mind because we do have good gorillas at the Bronx Zoo. So
yeah,
I was like,
exactly.
well. That's funny. All right, so we're gonna jump into it. We're in as most of you know, we're in kind of an exciting moment in the sports calendar. Of course, this is March Madness, which will still be going on before, during, and after we record this podcast, which is a little bit of a rarity. And that, along with some other sports ratings news, have continued the trend that live sports ratings are back to being a powerhouse at sort of all scales of the ecosystem. So, Steve, what are some of the numbers on some of these first round NCAA?
Okay, so this is obviously published in multiple places, but what I'm looking at here is in the Athletic. This is the Athletic, right? Yeah, Athletic. March Madness World Baseball Classic earned strong viewership. Sports on TV by Bill Shea, dated March 21st. So as it turns out, the NCAA tournament has been pretty much a home run here. Um, Average and now through let's see, Farley Dickinson, which was the number 16 team that knocked off the Purdue, 9.2 million on aggregate CBS, TNT, TBS, True TV, March Madness Live. Um, that was the aggregate, and then let's see, 9.2 million average for all games, March 16th, 17th. That, as it turns out, was the most watched first round ever since the tournament began in 1939. So it's the single best March Madness ratings that they've ever had. Wow, that's And by the way, the deal, in case anybody's wondering, the current TV contract was originated in 2011, and 10 years, 10.8 billion with CBS and Turner. The second round games, Michigan State Marquette, 10.91 million viewers. Arkansas, Kansas, 9.5. Kentucky, Kansas State, 9.4. Don't have an overall rating for the second round. A year ago, the top game was Michigan State and Duke, 11.2 million. And so that is, but that was for the entire tournament. And we're just talking about rounds 1 and 2 here, who are in the 9s and 10 million. So that's now the perspective here. I'm not trying to be sexist, but the women's tournament is a shadow of the men's tournament. So, the women's tournament across all ESPN platforms averaged 257,000 viewers per game. Tennessee, St. Louis, 639,000 viewers. Yukon, Vermont, 636,000. That contract is 14 years, 500 million total. So for those of you who think they're equivalent, they're in any way equivalent. Some of the second round games, Iowa, Georgia, 1.45 million. That's the perspective, and so it's not close. But
But there are economies of scale issues, right? So, I bet you those numbers are good for what they
they are good
what
for
they
what they're.
paid
I'm
for it.
just saying
Yeah.
from a gross comparison
No.
standpoint, because I know certainly, there's some politics involved here and some social engineering and stuff, because people there are forces out there that want both tournaments to be equivalent, which is fine, but the simple fact of the matter is a lot, as you can tell, like 10 times less people watch the women's tournament than the men's. That's just a fact. But the important part here is that the CBS has hit a home run this year with the tournament ratings. It's it kind of snuck up on me a little bit, so I was not expecting the ratings to be this high, but they had a bunch of good games, this year. So not surprised. But that's kind of an overview. Your thoughts?
Well, we've talked about it, and we've seen the numbers for live sports rebound pretty significantly across all sports, big, medium, and large. I mean, they're all relevant to the audience that they would normally get. But we've seen that snap back to sort of pre-pandemic levels, if not sometimes in like the NCAA tournament here, the men's anyway, snapping back to above pre-pandemic levels. So I think that's the big story overall. It's not that surprising to me, that it's such a one thing that they do is they just own such a time of the calendar that's a little bit of a quiet time. The NHL and NBA playoffs just haven't started quite yet, so they're not in their postseason. Baseball is just starting to dust itself off, a little bit different this year, which we'll talk about, but still, football is in the sort of which is still dominates the headlines, but you still get a little breathing room in March.
It's right before the draft, after
Yeah,
the push of free
and kind of in
agency.
between the free agency rush and draft, so it's leaving a little bit of a gap there. So I think they've just carved out. So the sports fan really has one option, and yeah, you're right. The games are great. The tournament does sustain this kind of parity. There aren't dominant teams, which has been a trend over the last couple of years. And I find it amazing that with Fairleigh Dickinson, that you could have that number for a 116 game, but my brother, I'm a good example. My brother texted me and he's like, you need to turn, probably with about 4 to 5 minutes to go in the fourth or the second half of that game, said you need to turn on the television. History is about to be made, and this is not like the last 30 seconds. I saw basically the last chunk of the game, and it was pretty wild. And I'm sure that was I'm sure television sets were clicking over all across the country.
Yeah. So one thing I like to point out here for you marketing types out there, a huge, huge reason why this tournament has really built itself up are the March Madness brackets.
Oh yeah.
And because what it does is it drives interest, because now people, even if they're not betting, like I always do when I actually was really busy last week or 2 weeks ago and I didn't do one for the first time, maybe that since I can remember. But I don't even bet on it. I just do it and follow it along, and I mark off my chart. I print it and mark off my chart as the games go and everything, and I always upload it to ESPN in case I'm like the one in a million or whatever who wins their prize. But it drives interest. This is why these ESPN and CBS and all are willing to host those bracket monitoring things for free, because that takes a significant amount of server space to upload X number of millions of brackets. It's costing them money, but it's driving ratings ultimately. And so it just goes to show that if you're trying to sell a product, if you have multiple ways to drive interest, it's not just broadcasting games. And I got to say, for me, because I didn't have time to fill a bracket out, I have watched less of it than I normally would. And it's because in the back of my head, my vested interest isn't quite as there as it normally is. And so I've certainly watched some of it and everything, but it's not been as much. So I think there's a psychological marketing trick going on with this tournament that just doesn't exist in other things.
It's also some of these things take decades. Like this is they're getting this because of the results of decades of work and investment and growth too. This is not, March Madness is not an overnight sensation by any stretch. One quick thing, before we kind of compare and contrast with the World Baseball Championships here, is that just viewers note, this will be Jim Nance's last cutting down of the nets. So he is not retiring in general, because he's still, again, do golf and football, obviously. But he is stepping down as the main play-by-play voice of March Madness, which I think, I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head, but it's at least
It's been
15
a while.
to 20 years. Yeah,
it's
if not
been
a
a
little
long
bit
time.
more. Ian Eagle will be replacing him. I think he's quite good. So he'll be taking over as of next year. But so as you're watching, say goodbye to Jim Nance.
Yeah, and sorry, he's been great. I like everything about the tournament. Even like the one shining moment has become a thing. I always make an effort to watch that. You know, and you notice like tradition counts, it matters. Because there was, I don't know, was it 6 or 7 years ago, maybe more, that they had Jennifer Hudson redo the song, and which obviously she's female, not a male voice doing it. And then the video track cut to her a few times, and everybody hated it. And now they've gone back to the original, or one of the older versions of the song. So there's a lot of tradition that goes on in this. I think it's a really well done product, just generally, because let's be honest. I mean, college basketball does not get these kind of ratings anywhere close to that during the regular season. Even the tournaments don't. Even like the Big Ten tournament or whatever does not get that. It doesn't come close to college football at all. But this tournament does, and they've marketed it over decades, a long time, in such a way that it is at the pinnacle now. Because the only other sporting event that really gets these kind of ratings, the NFL. Nothing else gets these kind of ratings.
Yeah, I agree. It's the sort of number 2 sports entity. And
money
they paid
wise,
for
it
it.
might be number 1 in terms of overall money come in.
And they paid for it in 2012. So I mean, someone will pay more later, but they're kind of on a bargain deal.
Yeah, it's
that contract.
It's a sine wave, kind of goes like this, and they're kind of at the low. But yeah, it's what was it, 14 years? Did I say 14 years to 2011? So they got another couple years, so they're gonna pay through their nose. Somebody is.
Yeah, someone will. Yeah. The World Baseball Championship was kind of going on opposite. Actually, so was the XFL. Maybe so we'll talk about both these things. But the World Baseball Championship did solid ratings for what it was, and actually, as much as the ratings actually gobbled up some attention and sort of mind space in this sporting world, which I don't think they were necessarily prepared for. And it has this event, which if you had asked me, if we had talked about like, oh, the World Baseball Championship is coming up, on this show a couple weeks prior, I would have been like, no one cares about this, like in America at least. And I don't know. I think the narrative on that might be changing.
Yeah. So first of all, that same article I gave you guys before has some World Baseball Classic ratings in here, and just as an example, U.S. over Cuba semifinal match last Sunday, 1.94 million viewers, but that's on FS1. That's where all of these are broadcast. U.S. over Venezuela Saturday, 2.26 million. We don't have the ratings for the Japan-Mexico game. That was a walk-off. We don't have the ratings for the championship game, which was, as you said before the show, Chris, straight out of a movie. It was Shohei Ohtani struck out Mike Trout with one on in the bottom of the ninth, 2 outs to, seal a victory for Japan. Don't have the ratings for that. Now, this article does give some numbers from last time from Japan. And you ready for this? 62 million viewers on Japanese television. The last one 5 years ago. For a rating of 44, which is the percentage of Japanese TVs watching the game. So that is bigger than any World Series ever. That's getting close to bigger than Super Bowl in terms of the ratings. Unbelievable. The last World Baseball Classic, 2017, averaged combined 3.1 million viewers on MLB Network, ESPN2, and ESPN Deportes. That was for the U.S. victory over Puerto Rico. The Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico final, 1.1 million viewers, which obviously is less because the U.S. was out. So that is World Baseball ratings. Obviously, it's dramatically less than the NCAA. We know that. But for them, this was a rousing success.
I got some more details on the final game, which
okay, go ahead.
Which
yeah,
only underline your point. I think I can give you a couple more details, but I think that sort of the eye popping headline is, for me at least, is that the title game had a bigger viewership than all but one Major League Baseball game on FS1 in 2022.
Wow!
And that was a Padres Phillies National League Championship Series Game 4. So that's pretty impressive.
It really is. And if you go back to why this tournament even happens in the first place, it was because the Olympics poured baseball out several years ago. It used to be an Olympic sport, and it's not anymore. And so they formed this World Baseball Classic to have some, basically an international competition. That's why it exists at all. And it's really set during spring training in large part because you don't want to disrupt the Major League Baseball season. That's kind of why it's there. That is unbelievable. I would not have guessed that it would have had higher ratings than the NL Championship.
So that it was the average. It was basically 4.97 million and that's just in the U.S. Plus, and I think globally it was a huge success. So like we're only looking at one country, and what I think is really interesting about this is you know, have they now? There's some special things about this one. It was in the United States, so that helps to a large degree on a few fronts. And I think you did get more major leaguers playing, which we can talk about some of the negative effects of that in a second. But so the Mike Trouts of the world showing up to play in your tournament is huge. So they had star power. It was in the United States. So are those things somewhat unique? Although I think you'd see more stars going forward. But have they been able to establish this over about a 20-year time as a international competition at the size and scale of, or starting to be like the World Cup? Is that trending?
Yeah, I don't think it's been 20 years. I think that.
Almost,
Yeah, we'll
I'll
look
look.
that
I'll
up because
look
I
it
don't
up.
think it's been that long. But yeah, I mean they're building it, I think the contrast between the U.S. ratings for this and the NCAA obviously not close. 4.97 million, and then 3 million, 1 million compared to 10 and 11 million is telling. But the tournament's been going on for decades.
All right,
As
so
we
the
say,
first game in WBC history saw South Korea defeat Chinese Taipei 2-0 before a crowd of 5,000 at the Tokyo Dome on March 3rd, 2006. So not quite
okay,
20
okay,
years.
so 15, 16 years. Okay, all right. So yeah, anyway, but the point is valid, which is it's not been anywhere near the length of time that the NCAA tournament's been going on. And they're building, and also, I mean, the audience is the broadcast network is less. It's on FS1, and that's in the U.S. That's the only place that can have it. Whereas the NCAA tournament's on about 4 different networks. And
Yeah,
they're
that might be a change you see in 4 years.
oh, absolutely, because it really did generate a bunch of interest. And even in my house, we were watching it. We watched the baseball tournament more than we have before, and because the games are just, the product is just entertaining this year. So um, that is the World Baseball Classic. Now let's contrast that, shall we? Shall we contrast it? Let's. The XFL has been on. Chris, have you attended an XFL game?
No.
Our very own Alex. We got to tell this on the air because it's just funny. Alex Zeese from Hogseye fame went to, what did he call it? A DC
Defenders
Defenders
meetup.
meetup, which ended up being 5 people in a bar. Basically, that is an exemplar of XFL ratings. So they did do fairly well for them in week one. What I'm looking at here is another athletic column. XFL midseason TV report card. Ratings have dropped, but is a rebound ahead. Bill Shea again, March 22nd. Okay, here's the headline, or the first sentence rather. The XFL's television viewership is dropping like a rock, perhaps to the chagrin of league owner The Rock. So they did pretty well in week one. Um, Averaged 1.3 million viewers, which really is pretty good for a backwater thing. But since that time, by the way, that is down from 3 million plus for the opening weekend in 2020. And then the second week, steep decline. Now we're down to women's basketball levels in terms of viewership. 659,000 in week 2, 572 in week 3, 507 week 4, 267,000 in week 5. That is not enough to keep them on the air, long term. Um, now, I don't know why. I mean, are you surprised by this? I'm not surprised in any way. What we've established over a number of years is that minor league football does not draw people. I don't know why The Rock ever thought it would change. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, this is 0% surprising. It probably was throwaway money for The Rock anyway. So as much as a hobby as anything, or just a lark, I don't think I don't think he's
Well, he's rich
expecting
enough to
any
where
return.
this qualifies as a
Yeah,
hobby for him. Yeah.
yeah. So no, I'm not surprised. And we followed a similar pattern that we've talked about and seen every time, which is remarkably been many times has been tried over like the last 7 or 8 years. But there's a spike in excitement, and attendance, which has also been dropping, by the way.
Except
And
for the DC Defenders are apparently the best team in this league.
you're undefeated, DC.
Yeah, for what that's worth. Because again, our own Alex Cease has made a big point of saying this because he's a huge homer. But they have actually weirdly been drawing pretty good fan attendance. And this same column here says that the DC Defenders St. Louis Battlehawks game drew 35,000, which is more than the Redskins get on an average game. Just I'd like to point out. Now that was at St. Louis, so that was in St. Louis. But they've been doing pretty well in ticket sales. It's just TV that's not. But you don't make bank on ticket sales. Sorry to tell
No,
you,
and I don't think that's holding across other
it's not.
markets
Yeah, I
either.
think there's 5 people watching the other games.
And thirst for other football options in Washington D.C. might be its own special use case. So but yeah, it's following the same pattern. There's excitement in week one, and there's like some like numbers that you can talk yourself into as being okay, and then they fall off a cliff. I mean, it's the same thing.
How
I
do you
listened
think
to
psychologically this is? Because the way I'd pose the question to you is, the NFL obviously is the number one game in town. Now, do people just like watching football, or are they just wrapped up in the drama of the NFL? Or is there something else? Because the XFL is football and it's in the same general ballpark of quality. It's not the same, but you're still seeing professional football players. But it's not close. So why?
I think it spikes because when they're in it, this isn't always the case, but they put it in a place where like the junkies need their fix, right? So, and then I think that gives you your early bump. I think that first of all, the quality of the football at best is the third version of football, right? Because every football fan, even that aren't necessarily college football fans on a regular basis, would rather watch a high quality college
Ohio
football
State,
game,
Michigan,
yeah,
absolutely.
than any of these games, right? So you're the third best football product in the best case scenario.
But
So
wouldn't
there are,
logic dictate though that the talent on the XFL teams are probably better than college teams though? Because all
well,
these guys are
probably, but
graduated college players.
I guess, but I think, yeah, but these college programs, these guys have been doing it for multiple years. I just think, I mean, football's the max team game, right? So you can't necessarily put together quality football team in weeks and months. That Randy Mueller, ex longtime front office executive, Seattle, Miami, bunch of teams. He does a good podcast on the Athletics podcast about football, but he's also the general manager of an XFL team. And so
That's probably his
they,
side gig. The podcast is
yeah,
his main
totally. And
gig.
they always kind of almost like jokingly start with their podcast with Mike Sando, the journalist, talking about that. And he's like, "Well, we're here another week." That was his,
We made it to week 5.
yeah, totally. So I mean, and that also kind of gives you a look into the seriousness of the people that are actually involved with the league.
Yeah, I think a lot of these leagues, part of their problem is their expectations are out of whack. They think the reason why I ask this is the real question is: are people addicted to football? Or are people just addicted to the NFL? And the answer is the people are addicted to the NFL. Not necessarily. I mean, they like football, but it's really more. The NFL has been going on since the 1920s, or whatever year it started. It's become kind of an American tradition. It's really kind of less the game and more so it's just become almost a creature of habit. more than anything else. Because like if you bring like Europeans and like non-Americans in, they a lot of times they think football's boring because it's just in their view, the play takes 5 seconds and you wait a minute and there's another play, and people who are not did not grow up with American football sometimes think it's a boring sport.
Yeah, and I think even if you don't like the NFL for whatever reasons, you have another option, which is the NCAA. And there's tons of people like, I hate the NFL, but I love college
Yes,
football. So like, they're covered, right? And also, I think football is more so than the other sports where a lower quality product is really less enjoyable. Like we can all go to a single A baseball game and have a great time. We could
yes.
same thing for hockey, same thing for basketball, even like sort of more stunt things in basketball work, like the AN3 league or whatever. But to see like lower quality, poorly organized football
It
just is
doesn't go
not the
well.
same. Yeah, it's not the same. It's not like the joy of watching like a double A baseball game.
So I think we can all agree that, I mean, the XFL may make it through this year, but at some point soon it's going to be the former XFL. I mean, it's not going to last. I mean, the arena football, went through what 3 or 4 iterations. It's finally dead. It's fine. The corpse is now gone through. Has been cremated. On the arena league, so how long is The Rock going to keep doing this? Is he going to power through this year and next season? Maybe so, but I don't think he's going to be able to carve out a niche for it really because if he does, it'll be a first and it just doesn't really seem to be clicking. I mean, the Alex Zeeses of the world, because they do have their fans, but Alex is a weirdo for small, little weird, off the beaten path things like that. But most people just aren't, and so I don't think anything's going to change. I really don't.
No, I don't think so. And in a world where we're seeing, at different scales, we're seeing an improvement in live broadcast in their audience, and this is going the other
Well,
way,
sort
almost
of
against every
though.
trend.
But remember, I mean, the numbers I read, 3.1 million for the kickoff game in 2020. Now they're down to below 500,000.
No, that's what I'm saying. The rest of sports is going in one way, and they're going in the other
Oh,
way in
yeah,
terms
yeah,
of
I
rating.
misunderstood you.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah.
Um. All right. So next up, it appears their big news reporting over the last couple of weeks is new extension in the works for Roger Goodell. There was no numbers, but I think he was already in the mid 60s, so you assume they're adding on some more money and more years. Which we can talk about that, which is a bit of a head scratcher on a number of levels, or it shows that he does his job so well of taking all the bullets that he's worth his weight. But Mark Maske, the NFL reporter for the Washington Post, he mostly covers the league, less the local team, although sometimes that crosses over. He had an interesting tweet, I believe it was on Friday afternoon, that said, don't expect this contract to get finalized during these upcoming ownership meetings, that they're still kind of they're still sort of talking about numbers and, that it doesn't, it isn't a priority to get done this week, basically. That I
Yeah,
thought was interesting.
yeah, and the tweet he's talking about is from Friday afternoon, like 5:30 ish East Coast time, and specifically what he says is quote from Maskey. NFL team owners won't necessarily ratify Roger Goodell's pending contract extension at this league meeting. Source says, quote, we just haven't gotten around to pinning down the numbers. It's not going to be a problem, just maybe not at this meeting. And that strikes me as kind of a PR statement a little bit. And I think which is what Chris suggested, I think the implication is that they're not going to rush it. Maybe there's not a reason to rush it. Maybe they're waiting for something. Maybe it's waiting to see how Roger works his way through the Dan Snyder mess, which we're all sick of. Maybe it's a negotiating tactic because at this level you negotiate in the media, right? So maybe the source is like Jerry Jones's assistant or something, and it's an intentional leak designed to kind of slow the roll so that they can publicly kind of put the brakes on paying Roger enough. I mean, this is the kind of thing that goes on at negotiations at this level. So it could be that because I don't think objectively Roger Goodell is not worth $65 million a year. I mean, that's crazy. A CEO, granted, CEO of a major corporation, I get it, but I, I've always thought they overpaid him compared to his market value to them. But I have a feeling that leak is probably an intentional leak that is a designed negotiating tactic more than anything else. And it's a wait and see, we've been through a lot. Let's wait and see how you get through this current crisis kind of thing.
Well, what I think probably happened is that someone leaked some of that details about, done deal extension, blah, 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 which was like about a week ago. That probably was a little bit too early or leaked, or there were plenty of people that weren't too psyched about that leak, and it might have been a little bit premature.
Yeah, it could be.
And part of negotiating in the media. Because what struck me immediately when I saw that was that seems odd that they would go ahead and ink him into an extension in the middle of this Snyder mess. Not just because it's like, how do we sell a team and blah, blah, blah. But there are so many existential threats that are just where Snyder is the epicenter, right? We got the Gruden emails, we got all these various lawsuits and investigations. Lots of them have not been kind to Goodell, or that he's personally mixed up in. We've got the
well, let me stop you right there, because part of the allegations in the whole Snyder mess is that Goodell he's been accused of helping Snyder cover all the stuff up. Remember that.
Totally. And the loan that's the hidden loan and all kinds of stuff. Right. So he's so I thought it was odd. I'm like, wouldn't you, if this thing is as close to being done, and even close to being done, I would even say in the next 5 to 6 months, right? I'm not saying in the next couple of weeks, but I think the trend is it might take a little bit of time, but it'll probably happen. Why wouldn't you just wait till you're on the other side of this? And we know that some of the indemnification issues and stuff, and like who's going to shoulder blame, and who's going to be left holding what bags, is all still up in the air. So it seemed to me weird that you'd lock him in and not wait until he steers the ship through this. But it also just shows me that he does an excellent job of absorbing damage for the other owners, and they pay the premium for it.
Yeah, I've always wondered why Roger Goodell has been so deferential to Dan Snyder. I mean, does Dan Snyder have like naked pictures of Goodell with the mailman or something? I mean, I don't understand, because it does kind of seem like Goodell has gone out on a limb, for lack of a better term, for Snyder in ways that maybe he shouldn't. With helping to, kind of bury the sexual harassment story. We're not going to publish a written story on it. Organizing him, floating a loan for when Snyder bought out his minority shareholders, a couple years ago. All of those things, it does kind of make me wonder. And so I think you bring up a good point, which is, why would we do this right now when the Snyder thing is not resolved? And it kind of doesn't make any sense. And if you go back to when Goodell's contract has been extended in the past, I don't recall seeing any hesitation on it. It's, it's done, and we love him, and hoorah, kumbaya. And that's really not kind of what this is. And so it does seem premature a little bit, unless his contract term expires. That could be the thing. Maybe his term expires at the,
But that really hasn't been the story, right? The story's been extension.
I know, but
yeah,
maybe, but still, I mean, if his contract terms expire, then they need to get it done. That's all. Maybe that's the driving factor. But nobody has said that, though. If his contract was taken down to zero, I think somebody would have leaked that.
I agree. I think it would have been like, League and Goodell, 12th hour. Will they, I think that would be the story, would be that, will he even be around for the May meetings? So I think, but it definitely could be. I just think it's odd. I also, what do we think about the sale of the Washington football team? Is going rocky on a few levels, or, this is just the normal process of selling a $6 billion asset. But are you at all think the league is at all nervous here that they're getting themselves into a corner where the actual sale, not the valuation, because we already see in Washington that's way off, and probably had a bit of a chilling effect on the number of bidders. But if this thing sells, as a somewhat distressed asset for let's say around $6 billion, a couple billion under or over, who cares? There are only so many people that can buy these teams, especially under the NFL's current rules. Do you think Roger and the other owners are starting to get a little freaked out that they might be that that this might be a problem and these valuations might be a little inflated to actually? And what are they going to have to do to change to basically invite more people's ability to Saudi oil people and stuff like that? They're barred from buying teams now.
Yeah, possibly, but I also think that's why they're not driving Snyder out because they did, because if you dump Snyder and you have a vote and you order him to sell, then it truly is a distressed asset,
Yeah.
and then it's a mandatory sale, and so then people are gonna bid far less, and so I think what you're saying is what they're doing is an acknowledgement. I think of the bidding reality, so they don't want to put if Snyder's making an honest effort, it's going to keep the prices high, and that's better for everybody else. So I think that's why people are wondering why they're letting the guy kind of hang on and hang on and hang on. Now, but but the other half of it, which you said, is how many people can really afford to buy a $6 billion roughly asset? Not many when you're talking about. See, the NFL ownership rules, as you said, they're cutting out like the Saudi oil sheik types already, but you're also cutting out corporate ownership.
Yep.
Because you got many corporations that could buy $6 billion corporations. Those get swallowed up all the time. Like I'm to make something like GM could do a $6 billion merger if they wanted easily. Not that they would, but when you're talking about just single individuals who have the chutzpah, who have the capital to put up a 30% equity injection, that's $2 billion for those of you counting roughly in rough terms, and then have the clout to gather up 3 or 4 other billionaires who are willing to work on a minority basis. I mean, they have no say so in it at all, just investment. That are going to qualify, they're going to get voted in by the NFL. There's a very limited subset of people, and we're seeing that with Washington, this Washington sale, because we've had, I don't know if Jeff Bezos is a bidder or not, but there's one. This Josh Harris character's one. There's the guy with the Greek name whose name I can't pronounce, Papoulis, this guy whose name just came out, Tillman Fertitta, who's here in Houston. That's not a lot of people, and there aren't a lot of billionaires like that. You throw in Bezos, you throw in Warren Buffett, those guys could afford it, but there's a limited group of people. Then you have to have interest. So yeah, I do think they're getting to the point. If you're what you're driving at is, are they getting to that point where the valuations are so high they're driving themselves out of a market? This is called capitalism, and if that's the case, then the prices will go down.
Or they'll change those rules, right? So
Right. The latter is
they'll
more
tweak the
likely.
rules to allow a bigger pool.
The latter is more likely. Yeah, and I don't think
Yeah.
they'll ever let the Saudi Arabian oil sheik in necessarily. But could you see a universe in which they'll allow some form of limited corporate ownership?
Yeah.
They don't want to, but that would be the next step. I don't think I don't.
Raise the debt rules.
Yeah, because they already waive those on a regular basis as it
Yeah.
is.
So
But
maybe
they
they
don't think
set
they
those
want the.
differently.
I don't think they want the PR hit of like a Chinese oligarch rolling in here or somebody like that. I don't think they want. They're not at that point just yet.
Yeah, so it's almost, and then to your point about minority owners. So if you say to a minority owner, like, listen, you get a parking space and you get nothing else, but you've got probably one of the best investment assets known, in the face of the earth. But do they? Because if you're getting to the point where 6 billion aces everybody out, well, then that minority investment starts to, like, it'll be. Let's just say this all works out how everyone wants, and it comes in around 6 billion, and we get this all wrapped up, and kickoff 2023. There's a new owner, whatever. For this topic, the next thing to look at is Seattle, because everyone figures that the Allen family, Paul Allen died a couple years ago. They have no interest. They're probably just sorting a bunch of financial things, and as soon as all their house is in order, they're going to put the Seattle Seahawks up for sale. Now that's the fundamentals for the Seahawks are very strong. Huge city, tech epicenter.
No controversies.
Yeah, no controversies, solid team, history, blah blah blah. So that's a very good franchise to go up. And I'll be curious to see what happens there, and because if we get a little bit of a return to the mean, or do they tweak the laws? That'll be the really fascinating. That'll be a more fascinating use case than actually Washington with all of its peculiarities.
Yeah, I think the Washington sale is way off the beaten path at this point because it's such a mess, and the owner's such a mess, and he's in front of Congress, and like I've been calling it a distressed asset. It's not truly a distressed asset because there's solid income, but it you're kind of headed down that road a little bit just because it's such a train wreck by NFL standards. So yeah, I do think that is the trick because obviously what's happening here is this: the Broncos. Just and for context, Washington sold into to Little Danny in 1999 for something like $700 or $800 million.
Yeah.
I forget the exact number, something like that. And so, for those of you counting, we're up to like an 800% rate of return for this, roughly. The Broncos sold for 4.5 million. The reason why the owners are allowing this train wreck to continue is that they are trying to normalize 6 billion. Because if Washington's worth 6 billion, the Seahawks would be, because as you say, it's not in it's on the West Coast, not the East Coast, but it's a solid product. And so they would have successfully increased the value, basically the average value of an NFL team by 33% in like a year and a half. And so they're trying to normalize $6 billion because it does better for all of them. So I think that's why they're allowing this farce to continue. And to go back to the to the Goodell thing, certainly I think if Goodell on they would rather have Goodell, his resume bullet includes brokered sale of Washington Seawords for $6 billion for highest price ever as a resume bullet. It makes him more apt to hand him $65 million a year.
Yeah, and just steering the league towards those new heights in terms of sale
Survived
prices and
COVID
valuations.
controversy.
Yeah.
Successfully navigated concussion lawsuits.
Right. Jeez,
Sold.
that's probably the biggest one.
It is money wise. It is. That's a billion dollar case there. Successfully got Danny Snyder out of the league. Sold team. Brokered the sale of 3 franchises. Seattle.
Well, that would be fourth because we got Carolina, Denver, Washington, and
True,
Seattle.
Carolina. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Seattle hasn't happened yet, obviously. But point is, I think you're right in saying that's probably what they're waiting for. And the statement by Maske got, which is quoted just an anonymous source, I think is worded in a particular way, and it was probably an intentional leak.
Yeah, I agree. So just fascinating, to see what happens there. I predict by the time we get a Seattle officially up for sale, they have tweaked. I'm not saying they radically redo, but they will have tweaked their rules about ownership to some degree based on this process. And I think I'll go on record right now. That's the team that Bezos will be buying.
Yeah, well, I think so. Why would it not be Seattle? And the other thing is, the Allen family or his estate probably is intentionally waiting on Washington to set the bar.
Yeah, they're
not going to do it now.
Yeah. So our last story.
But before you go, just Bezos, I know Washington fans are pining away for Bezos, and I've said my piece about what I think about him personally. But also, you guys have to understand Bezos is a Seattle guy. Amazon is based in Seattle. It makes all the sense in the world for Bezos if he's going to buy something to buy it, the Seahawks. So
100%, and they just hit the brakes on that new corporate office park in the DC area.
Yes,
Amazon.
they did.
So well, he's building a thing here. Well, okay, well, no, he's not.
No, he's not.
He's significantly scaled back.
Right.
So the last story, we won't belabor this too much because we hit this all the time, but we did get an interesting in a long form op-ed in the New York Times, and then an interview in Sports Illustrated, and then I think we were just reading a recap article in Sports Illustrated. The Notre Dame, what is he, the president or the head of sports or whatever?
Athletic director.
Yeah, athletic director. Basically, coming out pretty strong, saying that if the NCAA doesn't get ahead of or wrap its arms around or some way figure out a sensible path forward with NIL, then it probably could very much be the end of the NCAA or college athletics as we know it, which we've been saying for years at this point on this subject. But just have someone at the sort of like platform and kind of reputation of Notre Dame say this. It is one of those. He probably didn't want to say this publicly, and probably felt like he had to.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, two smart guys on a small business podcast have been saying what this guy just said. We've been saying it for years. So this, first of all, if you want to read what we wrote, what we're talking about here, the SI article is Notre Dame AD says NCAA could break apart without stronger NIL guidelines by Ross Dellinger, March 23rd, 2023. I can't access the New York Times. I'm not a subscriber, but the link is in the article, is in the SI column if you want to read it. And so, and the Notre Dame athletic director's name is Jack Swarbrick, is the name. So a quote here. There's a few quotes. College athletics is in crisis. Swarbrick and Notre Dame president John Jenkins write in the Times. So the op-ed was by both of them, not just Swarbrick. So John Jenkins, the Notre Dame president. What they're basically saying here, they're advocating against players as employees. They are concerned that a Supreme Court opinion from 2 years ago will lead down the road eventually to employment. And they're quoting some language. I have not read this opinion, at least not in 2 years. So I don't want to go too much down the rabbit hole of what that opinion said. But the case wasn't about, it was about benefits for athletes, and the case suggested they can get benefits, but it did not address employment status. But the Swarbrick and Jenkins feel as though the opinion was opening the door to potentially inviting, the Alston was the case, to potentially inviting a new case about employment. And if that is the case, that is truly the end of NCAA athletics, because the entire model here is set up to make money for these organizations. And like ethically, sure, you could probably make a case that if these athletes are going to make all this money, they ought to be cut into it and all of that. But if you call football players and basketball players employees, then there's going to be an employees union. Then they're going to have to have an NFL style split of revenue, and the entire system blows up. At that point in time, then I could legitimately see the Power Five conferences breaking off and doing their own thing. And that's exactly what they are talking about in this column. To quote something, this is from Swarbrick, quoted in the SI column. You're going to have administrative tribunals and courts in the coming months declare student athletes, in certain cases employees. We are most concerned about that development and its implications for our students. The students I talk to generally don't want to be classified as employees. And they're downplaying because they don't want it because it costs them millions of dollars. Thoughts?
I mean, this is all stuff we know, we've talked about, right? It's sort of like a little bit Captain Obvious here. I think it's more about who's saying it and what they're saying.
Yes.
I think their real message here is the genie's out of the bottle, right? There's no going back to 2019 or whatever it would have been. But the sort of flat-footed no response is what is sort of speeding up the disaster. And I think they're saying is the NCAA has got to get creative here to get out ahead of this. It's going to be a new world that they're going to have to try to create that has some rules and regulations or norms or whatever around what can be done here. But doing nothing and just being like, this restrictive gatekeeper to just open borders is, I think, probably the chaos that's ensued from that is what their biggest critique is. But I appreciate that he, or in the essay, it sounds like, they look at the hypocrisy full on. So they have, I think it's Swarbrick that says, people were paying under the table for as long as I've been around, he says. Now it's the same payment, but they're calling it NIL. We're not going to stop it. It's not going to all go away, but we've got to get out of this position where the vast majority of the transactions occurring are not what they were characterized as. So I think he's saying a couple things there. He's saying, listen, all this done is normalized, is made legit what was illegitimate. And we've got to figure out a way to create new rules for a new reality, which to me is the common sense approach this whole time. And the reason, especially in obviously college football and college men's basketball, this is why this has been an oil-laden grass fire, because all of these systems were already in place. All this was their, this was Michael Corleone taking the business legit. So it's not surprising that all these things got turned on and basically overnight.
Yeah. You know, the NCAA really only has himself to blame in part for this. You can't subscribe all the blame for the fact that several states passed laws saying athletes can sign deals on them. But what you can blame the NCAA for this is what these guys are advocating is for the NCAA to pass some rules that govern the execution of contracts. Okay, they want some rules. Um, but what the NCAA didn't, not only did they not act as a gatekeeper, they actually opened the floodgate tremendously by opening the transfer portal. And so for those of you who recall, it was just a few years ago that you had to sit out a year if you were going to transfer universities. So not only did the NCAA not pass any rules that govern contracts, marketing deals signed by players, but they simultaneously, for no reason really, eliminated the transfer portal, which meant that you could change universities on a dime. So it truly became the Wild West. And that is 100% on them. They didn't have to do that. You could have still had a year transfer portal and would have sort of calmed down just the outright bribery that's going on right now. And so their real point here is that I think the NCAA has themselves to blame, and they're asking the NCAA to man up, for lack of a better term, and establish some actual policies that will control it before the sport is totally ruined. I think that's what they're saying.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, you could make a case that, like, Notre Dame kind of represents a stodgy, kind
The
of
old school.
yeah. So, but I actually think when you actually read what they're saying, they're actually arguing for a progressive path. I don't mean in a political way, but like in a proactive, we'll call it, way forward.
Well,
Like,
they're
hey, let's
advocating.
figure this out.
They're advocating to somebody put some reasonable limits. They're advocating for the end of the Wild West because
Yeah.
we're in that Wild West right now. It's like cowboys and Indians shooting each other in the middle of the Arizona desert, and what they're advocating for is to have some rational business reality to govern all this stuff, so it's not just totally the Wild West. That's what they want. Their fear is if it continues, and they're right, because again, we've been saying this forever. The NCAA doesn't really continue to exist as
Yeah,
is
they're putting
if it goes
themselves on their
forward.
own clock. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, that's what they're saying.
Um, all right. Well, that was good stuff, Steve. What do we have going on? I'm sure you're breaking down the Buffalo nickel options and whatnot.
Well, sure. Yeah, we are in the heart of preparing for the draft. We've been through, I think, all but running backs for free agency previews, and I think we're just going to skip running backs because we kind of ran out of time. But so we have all that stuff going on. We've got draft previews, a written mock draft analysis going on. We have our weekly Hogsty show, which is on Thursdays. Rick Snyder's show is still in hiatus, but he'll be back. And we have all of our other regular written content.
Well, that sounds good. Yep, draft is just around the corner for all you draftniks. So, endless mock drafts are ahead of you, and I will be doing 0.
You don't do mock drafts. That's
Oh,
right.
that's so dumb. Um, all right, Steve. We'll see everyone in 2 weeks.